Hello, everyone. Welcome to CXO Spice. CXO Spice is a platform for thought leaders to share their point of view on innovation and explain how to make it happen in real world. Today's topic is activating Gen AI. Our special guest today is Mindy Cancila, VP of Corporate Strategy at Dell Technologies. Hello, Mindy. It was wonderful to meet you at Dell Tech World in May. Welcome to CXO Spice.
Hi, Helen. Great to be here. Thank you for having me and nice to see you again.
Likewise. So tell us more about your journey to tech and your role as VP of Corporate Strategy at Dell Technologies.
Sure. I was lucky enough to come out of college and land in an internship in a technology-oriented company and team. I started working at Compaq Computers back in the 90s, and I came into what was the mainstream server team. I've spent my career building compute and storage-oriented products. I transitioned to Dell in the early 2000s and have had a number of roles in my time at Dell. They've all been from an engineering or a strategy perspective. Around 2010, I led some qualitative research around emerging technology areas, think software-defined storage, public cloud, and really found a love for not only building upon that customer experience and engagement, but also the emerging technologies and how customers would think about deploying those. I moved to Gartner as a public cloud analyst, and I spent about 10 years helping organizations develop and execute their public cloud strategies. It was a really fascinating time to take the things I had learned from an enterprise perspective and bring those to market more broadly with a number of customers across industries, verticals, geos, and really see how those technologies take shape differently. I've been back at Dell since June of 2022, and I lead the team in corporate strategy that's focused on growth and activation. And as a result, we look at all these emerging technologies and think about those that are going to be most impactful to our customers and really assess methods that we can harness that technology and innovation and put it in our customers' hands.
Wow, what an inspiring journey, Mindy. And I'm just excited about diving into our conversation with you. As you know, AI technologies are evolving rapidly. So how does Dell Technologies view the role of AI in transforming industries and driving innovation?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, everything you read today talks about generative AI. I can't go anywhere without having a conversation with a customer or somebody in industry that's talking about the impact that it's having across all of our businesses. I love one of the things that Michael said, which was AI isn't going to take your job, but the companies that figure out how to harness AI will disrupt your environment. And I think that's very right and true. We see this across every industry vertical and geo as they seek to understand this technology transition. So I thought it might be helpful to first start and just talk a little bit about what is generative AI and where does generative AI fit within the broader umbrella. When I think about the broader umbrella of artificial intelligence, we've been talking about AI for more than a decade. This is not new. What's new about generative AI is the fact that there was a certain company that really evolved the capabilities and put that generative AI, that capability in their hands. And when you think about what that does and how it's different, it's really ingesting tons of data and building out this neural network that really allows you to make decisions based on and interact with a platform that is really fueled around that ingestion of the data that you've provided. This is another massive technology inflection. From my experience, we see those about every decade, right? If you think back to mainframe, client server era, you think about cloud computing, and I really feel we're at the beginning of this transition that's really disruptive around generative AI. Again, the broader AI work, we've been talking about machine learning, how we ingest artificial intelligence, and many organizations have use cases today. And I've actually been surprised as I've talked with companies about their generative AI strategies. Quite often, they tend to come back to actual AI-oriented use cases. Very few are actually deploying generative AI solutions today. But again, everyone is trying to figure out how to harness that technology and drive the innovation into their organization. Innovation comes in lots of form factors. Often we talk about and we think about with generative AI in particular, oh no, is this going to impact me and my job and my role? When really what we see most organizations doing is leaning into this idea of increased productivity and in a really new way, rather than how can I get more out of the resources I have, it's how can I take the things they do today and offload those through generative AI and therefore take my talent so they can do more impactful types of tasks. So it's really as much of an increasing productivity as it is driving operational efficiencies otherwise. We see a number of use cases, when we think about things that are highly repeatable, and that really can benefit from that large scale data that gets ingested and infused into the learning model. That's really where we see benefits. Think things like software engineering, sort of a surprising one. That's a market or a talent, a trade that's been pretty well established as something that's differentiated. And now for the first time, we're seeing generative AI solve problems in software development and develop code in ways that we never could have before. We also see opportunities around use cases in marketing. Think about things like knowledge-based articles. It's an opportunity that Dell's looked into and talked about publicly. When you have a lot of data that's static, it's public facing, there's a good opportunity to marry those two things together and think about those functional use cases that could drive outcomes. So that's really the way I think about AI. Again, the broader AI, we're really focused on generative AI, which is a subset, and a lot of momentum in market as it's really expected to massively disrupt all industries.
Well, many salient points here, Mindy, especially the point you made about driving productivity rather than just focusing only on operational efficiency. I can't really agree more with you on that. AI obviously has certainly become a must-have topic, especially for corporate strategy team today. And what's your advice for business leaders on where to get started with strategic integration of AI?
Yeah, just like we were just talking about those use cases that are they productivity oriented? Are they operationally efficient? I actually had a customer I spoke with last week that was for the first time thinking about how they could use generative AI to actually drive revenue independent of the people in their organization. And so that's just a whole different way of thinking. So when we think about this, I think what's most important is to be purposeful and think about the outcomes you're trying to achieve. In other words, make sure you really have a strategy for what it is you're solving for. I find that many companies that I interact with tend to think, oh my gosh, everywhere I go, they're talking about generative AI. We're on 9 months now since the first, instantiation of ChatGPT really went viral in the November timeframe of 2022. And as a result, organizations are thinking I'm behind, when in reality, it's still very early in this market. Again, we talked about AI versus the subset that is generative AI. The AI use cases I see massively pervasive today are predominantly AI use cases. No surprise, it's been around a decade. The generative AI piece is what's really new that organizations are trying to figure out. And so my number one bit of advice would be you are not behind, and as a result, do not make rash decisions on things that you need to move or mobilize quickly for fear that you're falling behind of your competitors. That said, again, I go back to that opening point. The companies that harness generative AI are the companies we believe are going to disrupt the industries. They're going to drive new revenue streams. They're going to seek new opportunities for operational excellence, and they are going to have a resulted increased productivity. And so when I think about that, my second recommendation would be look within your organization and think about the use cases that really can drive those expected outcomes. Which of those three things are you trying to solve for? Or is it something different? And then what are you going to do first in order to help really enable that technology? The third thing I would say is reflect on your past mistakes, maybe. Maybe we don't want to go that far as to say there were mistakes, but lessons learned or opportunities of things to do differently. I mentioned that I spent 10 years helping organizations mobilize their cloud strategies. And when I think about what many of them did, they were tops down driven. They often weren't fully aligned across the business, and they didn't quite understand what they were getting into. No fault of the organization. It was sort of like generative AI. It dropped in your lap, it was easy to access, and as a result, everyone tried to harness and use that technology very quickly. And sometimes, unfortunately, more often than not, they made decisions that I think in many cases, if they could rewind the clock, they might approach differently. And so, in light of all of that, I recommend a couple of additional things. Think about those mission critical deployments, and that's probably not where you want to start. Think about those things that are not tied to production, they're not tied to your most sensitive data, they're not tied to productivity. And that's really a good opportunity to start so you can understand the technology, build the skills, adapt the processes, which sort of gets me to my last point. Think about the people, the process, the technology. We talked about the technology. Those processes are important. We'll talk more about those, I'm certain, today, but the people as well. What talent do you have in your organization? What kind of culture are you setting across the organization? Is it one that's leaning into the technology and really encouraging people to go harness that? Or is it one that's more fearful? And then last, when you think about the technology itself, do you have the right data strategy? Do you have the right data center footprint in order to adopt these types of technologies? Do you have the right security postures? So a lot in that, but it all comes back to think about your strategy, and that should be rooted in purposeful outcomes that are going to either drive increased productivity, operational efficiencies, or net new revenue streams.
I love that. That's really profound, Mindy. And speaking of that, let's dig a little bit more deeper into this. So how does Dell approach developing AI solutions that are tailored to meet specific needs and challenges of business of different sizes and different industries?
Yeah, well, first I would say we're early in this journey, just like our customers, right? Everyone's really scrambling to figure this thing out. That said, we've been building infrastructure and technology solutions for decades and really helping organizations not only deploy, but secure and manage their most sensitive data. And so we think that's critically important. And we've always been focused on meeting our customers where they are. When I think about generative AI, to me, this is all about the data, right? What's interesting about what you can do with generative AI is it's a function of what the data is learning based on human inputs and training and fine tuning a model based on the data you feed it or you make available to the model. And you're likely to going to want to use your own data, but you're also going to want to use sources of other data. And so think about the data, your own data strategy. And then when you think about those use cases and what you're trying to achieve, think about the data sources available in market that are going to make your model most impactful as soon as possible. And that really gets us to a point where you kind of have to understand my view of the life cycle of generative AI. We talk about these LLMs, these large language models that, you could build yourself, and few organizations are, but the reality and my recommendation is really think about, do you need to build this model? There are a lot of really great off the shelf models, even ones that have been tailored for various verticals that you're likely to be able to harness and deploy in your environment. That's important because that really sets the stage for how do you need to think about the underlying infrastructure. And for us as an infrastructure and solutions provider, it means we're thinking about what we think our customers are going to need to do. We've also obviously offered solutions to help develop and stand up LLMs, but there's a whole life cycle that sits beyond that where you take these models, you fine tune them with some human interaction. Then there's you train them, you fine tune them, and then we move into the inferencing phase. And that's really where I see a tie into edge-based deployments. And so when you think about Dell and the solutions we're providing, they build upon our portfolio of compute and storage solutions that we've had in market for years. It's really tailoring them to this new work case, this new use case, and really making sure that we're working to understand the most relevant use cases that those customers want to harness in order to drive those measurable business outcomes. Again, it all ties back to some type of a business objective that we're trying to help our customers solve for. And so that's really how I think about that piece of it. We really recommend that, organizations think about the types of solutions that they need based on those technologies available. I mean, again, if you're not building an LLM, you don't need all of these heavy horsepower GPUs, which means you don't need to stand up a data center that has all of this set of capabilities that, by the way, probably create some sustainability challenges for you and your organization. Conversely, if you really focus those attributes on the downstream aspects, that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity to rinse and repeat. And so that's really where we think about, these large language models and sort of the technology solutions. So I hope that was helpful.
Absolutely. Having worked with global financial institutions deploying AI since 5 years ago, I absolutely echo the sentiment about the importance of data strategy. I also learned that having that robust infrastructure and hardware are super critical, as you mentioned. So how does Dell Technologies ensure its hardware offerings are optimized for AI workloads, and what steps are taken to improve performance and scalability?
Yeah, well, again, I think it builds up what we were just talking about. Most customers aren't actually going to build large language models, is my belief. And as a result, it means we're thinking about the technology solutions that you need on the front end, where there's a lot of momentum and discussion right now. But the reality is, if you don't need all those heavy GPUs for the bulk of the work you're going to do to deploy generative AI, it allows you to shift your thinking around how do you get started, and then how do you evolve that as you move down the life cycle, right? You think about the power requirements, the cooling requirements. Again, we mentioned sustainability. I personally think that we're early enough that most can and should really think about how do they best deploy generative AI within their environment? What is that actually going to look like? And it's important to think about, the breadth of the Dell solutions in our portfolio. We're starting to see organizations question, what they need versus not. And what's exciting is it creates the space for something that looks potentially different. We've had so much momentum around these LLMs, these large language models. But what I actually think we end up with is an initial set of LLMs that people pull from. And then with some human intervention, they train those, they ingest and infuse their own data. They might do that real time. And then they fine tune that into something that looks like quite a bit smaller of a model, right? I even interacted with somebody last week that called it an SLM, right? These small models that they can run literally anywhere. So while we're on the front end of this conversation focused on, these massive GPUs and all this power and liquid cooling that I need, there's a place in market for that. It's very important. It's the fuel that helps us to start this. But what we really get to in the end is something that looks, I think, quite a bit different and is massively scalable. And when you think that through and you think about the breadth of the Dell portfolio, we fuel a lot of that technology innovation on the front end with those LLMs and those vendors building those. We have for decades worked with our organizations, our customers that have been deploying solutions for training and inferencing, right? We didn't call those things then, but we've had servers, we've had storage solutions, all the way into what those SLMs would run on when you think about, maybe it's something that runs on a mobile phone. And so what that means is we want to continue to build upon the things we've already invested in our portfolio, things that drive better increase in performance and lower energy, things that improve the sustainability in your environments. You think about solutions like, Optimizer that we brought to market that will help you to throttle your processor and your power supply so that you're not consuming power when you don't need to. Those are really getting into the nuts and bolts, the underlying things that we inherently build into our portfolio. But those are the types of things that we'll be keen to build upon to help our customers make sure that they're deploying generative AI in a sustainable or green friendly model that works for them and their environment and their goals as well.
As a matter of fact, I witnessed the power of Dell Technology solutions at Dell Tech World, right? Kudos. Let's switch gear a little bit. According to McKinsey, the latest state of AI in 2023, only 20% of companies have risk policies in place for generative AI. So data privacy and security are critical concerns in AI adoptions. So how does Dell prioritize data protection and build trust with customers in the context of AI-driven products and services?
Yeah, we've always been focused on data privacy and on security. We've had a pretty broad portfolio of offerings in both of those spaces. It's inherent in our solutions. We have, award-winning supply chains that ensure that products that ship from our manufacturing sites to your deployment scenario haven't been touched by anybody otherwise. So really minimizing that entire supply chain environment. Generative AI puts security on an entirely different vector, in my opinion. You not only need to think about the data that informs your model, but you need to think about the data that comes elsewhere that is ingested, and then the accuracy that is a byproduct of whether or not you insert that data. It means you need to think about where all of that should reside and where you have control of that versus not. But it goes beyond the data, right? I mean, certainly it starts there with the accuracy of the model, but you also have to think about the cost, the sustainability, the operational complexity of deploying these solutions. I had somebody ask me recently, can't you just give me the Gen AI easy button? And it's like, well, you know, that doesn't exist, but here's a philosophical shift that I think actually would allow organizations to get to that easy button. And instead of taking all of your data and bringing it to AI, take the AI and bring it to your data. Think about the data sets that you have based on those use cases, based on those outcomes you're trying to achieve. And really think about that as a way to drive the right model so that you have the security and the data privacy that you need in your deployment. I think about an analogy, again, this idea of what do you build versus what do you consume. If you think about a franchise, say a new restaurant, the first time that you build a restaurant, it's really labor and cost intensive. You have to design every facet of it. You need to think about, if it's a restaurant, you need to think about the chairs and the tables. You need to think about the roof. You need to think about the kitchen, the restrooms, every facet of that building. Once you've built it once and you franchise it, now you're going to make something much more repeatable, and you're going to learn from that and tailor and tweak it more readily. Not only that, how many restaurants do you know that once they do that once, then they sort of peel off and make a variant of that and do it for other, maybe we've done this for chicken and now we're going to do it for vegetables as example, right? And so when we think about this life cycle model of AI, that's sort of what comes to mind for me. The LLM being that first time you build the restaurant, and the franchise being the outcome you seek at the very end. And what fuels into all of that is the data, right? What did I start with? What are the things, the bones, the foundation? That's what organizations need to be looking at. And it makes that data privacy and security of the utmost important, which is why I say it sort of just puts security on a different vector. Not only that, most security attacks historically have actually not been malicious, right? Most security professionals that you talk to will tell you that most outages they have are an accident that somebody that was actually authorized to be in that environment made. And I think the same is true when you think about generative AI. Obviously, you do increase the surface attack, and you do have proprietary IP that you want to make sure that you're putting into the right types of models and not in the wrong types of environments. But when you think about how you're going to utilize these, the biggest threat is you have an entire organization that has this technology in their hands and they're ready to use it. How do you put policies in place to make sure you enable them to use the technology? I had somebody recently ask me if Dell was going to do anything to slow the adoption of Gen AI. And I sort of had to sit there for a second, and then I laughed. I said, I'm flattered to think that you think we could. But this train has left the station. This technology is out there. By the way, it's not really in Dell's DNA to stop technology innovation. We're actually quite the opposite. We believe you should harness it and put it in the hands of the people so that they can go do amazing things with it. So when I think about the data privacy, I think it's incredibly important that organizations understand that life cycle. Again, go back to that franchise analogy. Where are you in that process? If you're just building the building, you probably want to go to somebody and just buy the blueprint, right? There are people that do that every day, day in, day out. That's the same with LLMs. But what you're going to sell and how you're geographically going to center your franchise of restaurants, that's a part you own based on your data and your strategy. And so thinking about the data that fuels that and how you're going to secure that becomes really important.
I love that franchise analogy, right? So that's really makes total sense to me because I'm thinking about generative AI would be perfect to have a Lego like generative AI, right? People can go in without knowing anything and we can all make things out of it. But that actually a great segue to my next question. Collaborations and partnerships in the AI ecosystem can be instrumental in driving innovation. And so, how does Dell approach collaborations and with other technology providers and research institutions to further enhance its AI capabilities?
Yeah, Dell has been big on open ecosystems. We've talked extensively about that for decades, and you've seen us deliver on this with our multi-cloud strategies, taking those different technologies and putting them in the hands of customers so they have choice in what they deploy and where. It's just sort of in our DNA and who we are. We bring those to market and bring the weight of our global supply chain, our services organization, but we also deliver the innovation working with partners so that customers really have choice. And we're building upon what we've done in that regard with generative AI. So I'm sure many have seen the recent partnership announcements with NVIDIA and the things that we've done there to bring those solutions to market. But we're also partnering across our ecosystem to bring the right types of solutions to our customers.
Well, the announcement with NVIDIA partnership was really fun at the Dell Technology World. So kudos. So how does Dell Technology capitalize on generative AI? What are the key strategic aims when it comes to integrating AI technologies to enable the workforce?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to the things I shared when I think about use cases. Like everybody, I would recommend start with your strategy, and that's exactly what we've done. And so we've identified a number of use cases, some of which I can talk publicly about that have been shared. And we think about Project Clara is one that many have heard of, and that's a chatbot for our customer support organization that's really leveraging generative AI to drive different outcomes. We've talked about leveraging knowledge base articles, again, thinking about that public data that's available, that's public information, so you don't have that data security and process concern to go figure out. It allows us to really take our things and drive operational excellence so that we can pivot our workforce to things that are going to drive higher degrees of productivity. So follows the same trajectory of things that I would recommend for most organizations. Start with your strategy, identify your use cases, start with things that aren't mission critical, and really have a keen eye to what it is you're trying to solve for. And that's exactly what we're doing within Dell.
Makes total sense. So, Mindy, here comes to my last question. What are you most excited about when it comes to emerging technologies?
Well, it would be amiss of me not to talk about a generative AI example, right? There's lots of technology out there that I really enjoy interacting with, and I love seeing how customers are really harnessing that. But when I think about Gen AI, I think one of the most interesting facets that sort of struck me is the impact I think it will have on our current and our future workforce. And one of the top priorities within Dell is to really foster this diverse workforce. We really have taken a strong stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll tie this back to generative AI, I promise. Last week, I joined a Future of Work event, and we talked about the future workforce, and we talked about how do you create a culture. You've got all these people that are coming out of the pandemic, and they're in some way finding what their new hybrid work environment looks like. And this led us into a conversation that actually came back into generative AI, where we talked about the importance of developing diverse teams and the influence the technology has both on helping you advance, but also, if not done correctly, could hurt the progress you've made. Specifically, when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, we think about generative AI. You talk about those large language models, excuse me, and what they're learning from that through human intervention. It's very important that we think about infusing diverse perspectives as we train those models. If not, we actually have the risk of propagating unconscious bias that we've been working as a culture to really course correct. And so to me, this was a fascinating intersection of the technology, culture, and how we bring your corporate priorities. Again, for us, a big one is diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you bring those into the forefront so that as we train these models to make decisions, to make revenue streams for us, we do it in a way that further propagates our culture that we're trying to build and instead doesn't reverse that. So I'm excited to see how these technologies come together and impact the way we work in ways that we're not even thinking about today. That was one that struck me. And so that's an example of sort of what I think is exciting as we think about the technology.
Well, Mindy, that topic alone deserves another episode of CXO Spice. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on activating Gen AI with me today. So here are a few key takeaways. Number one, Dell emphasizes the strategic integration of AI to transform industries and drive innovation. The alliance partnership with NVIDIA really exciting that enables more enhanced customer experiences and operational efficiency. Number two, Dell remains at the forefront of AI advancement by consistently adopting and incorporating the latest development. This proactive approach ensures that customers benefit from cutting-edge AI solutions that addresses evolving needs and challenges. I love what you said about the four things, right? Number one is to start with the strategy and then define the use case and making sure you start with the non-mission critical initiatives and making sure you align with your business partners to adopt AI, generative AI. And thirdly is Dell employs a tailored approach when developing AI for different industries. By understanding specific business needs and challenges, Dell creates customized AI solution that delivers impactful results across various sectors. Lastly, recognizing the importance of data privacy and security in AI adoption, Dell places a high priority on protecting customer data. Through robust data protection measures and a commitment to building trust, Dell ensures the safety and reliability of its AI-driven products and services. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Stay hungry, stay bold, and stay grateful.